from early on the 26th of December, 1996, when police arrived to investigate a reported kidnapping at the Ramseys, Colorado home. They thought the parents were behaving strangely. Their suspicion grew that afternoon when John Ramsey discovered his daughter's body in this small cellar. By the time the body was removed late that evening, the police were almost certain the parents were involved. They had found no evidence of a break-in and no footprints in the snow. No one could have gotten in, something even the mayor confirmed.
By all reports, there was no visible sign of forced entry. The body was found in a place where people are saying someone had to know the house.
John and Patsy Ramsey now found themselves isolated and reviled. Few believed them when they said there was a killer on the loose. Instead, they were accused of deliberately sexualizing their daughter, turning her into a pedophile's dream. Police were said to believe that the parents had first abused JonBenét and then murdered her, faking the kidnapping plot to cover it up. 6 weeks after the killing, District Attorney Alex Hunter held a press conference.
I want to say something to the person or persons that took this baby from us. The list of suspects narrows. Soon there will be no one on the list but you.
Few doubted he was addressing the Ramseys, now openly branded by many as murderers. But despite his public confidence, behind the scenes, a split was already developing between police and the DA. Hunter feared the police investigation was getting nowhere. To help, he decided to bring in the best homicide detective he could find. Colorado Springs. Alex Hunter's search ended here. After looking at over 80 detectives,
Lou Smith is the very best violent crimes homicide detective that I know.
By the time Smith joined the Ramsey investigation, the couple were being hounded everywhere they went. One of their lawyers, worried by Smith's appointment, telephoned Colorado's former chief public defender.
Just more or less get myself ready to go for the day.
Even months after the murder, for Smith, the crime scene remained the most important part of his investigation. He was certain the killer would have left clues. It was just a matter of finding them.
When you're not in on a crime scene, you do miss out on quite a bit of the feelings that you get during the initial investigation. That's where photographs really do come in. The Boulder Police Department did take great photographs. I did spend a great deal of time inspecting each and every one of those photographs, and they did tell me a story.
Much of the house had been disturbed by friends who had gone to help the Ramseys. This made one police photograph particularly significant.
JonBenét's body was right behind that door when this photograph was taken. If that door would have been opened at that time, this case would have taken an entirely different turn. Everyone in the house would have been cleared out. Nothing would have been disturbed.
Smith found other early photographs that also worried him.
This photograph does show a lot of snow around the house. And if you've seen this, your first perception would be that a person who entered that house would have to leave some footprints in this snow. Now look at this photograph. The sidewalks are completely clear of snow. Another rather significant photograph taken from the alley. A person approaching this house from the alley would leave no footprints around the house.
Smith was surprised at the lack of snow, but the fact that someone could have reached the house did not mean anyone had. But it meant that he had to start looking for evidence of an intruder, which might have been missed. Because the family had been out visiting friends late on the night of the murder, there was plenty of opportunity for such a break-in.
If an intruder had spent any time at all checking out the house, he would have noticed that on various doors and windows, there was a sticker indicating that the house was alarmed. On a lot of these older houses, the windows leading into the basement are not alarmed. And that drew my attention to this window, on the north side of the house. It's a small window leading into the basement. When we inspected the photographs, we did see something very interesting.
Smith found the dust on the window frame had been disturbed. He also found what he thought were finger marks. He concluded that someone may have tried to open this window. Yet an interior photograph showed it remained locked and undisturbed. If there was an attempt, it had failed. However, another photograph taken in the basement suggested a second attempt could have succeeded.
Now, this is a photograph that really caught my eye because the window was wide open. But what also caught my attention was a mark on the wall leading right directly from this open window down to the floor. When I first seen that photograph, I thought, uh-oh, looks like somebody could have got in here.
That open basement window was at the side of the house, underneath an unlocked metal grill. According to Smith, if an intruder had got in this way, there would be evidence here on the outside as well as on the inside.
And that's exactly what the photographs show me.
There was a great deal of foliage which was on the front of the grate, and had actually been pinched under the leading edge of that grate. Even when you pick the grate up, you can see very clearly that there was green foliage right on the plate that the grate rested upon. Also, in looking into the window well, the window in the center, the one that had been opened, had a great deal of disturbance in front of that particular area of the window.
You can also see what appears to be finger marks on the window frame itself.
All this convinced Smith an intruder could easily have gotten in this way.
You know, it's been said that only a midget could get down into this grate. Well, I'm no midget, and I'll show you how easily it can be done. It really wasn't that difficult coming in that window. And often, a burglar or an intruder, if they find a safe way in, they also figure it'll be a safe way out. And if you remember, there was a suitcase that was right underneath this window. And if he figures that he has to go out this window, he may think that it would be much easier if there was something to stand on. And on top of the suitcase was a very small, tiny, pea-sized piece of glass, which may have been picked up by a person's shoe, and a faint impression of possibly a footprint on the suitcase. And that suggests very strongly to me that perhaps someone did stand on that suitcase at one point, perhaps to go out the window, or perhaps just to test to see if you could go out that window. Now, I can't say for sure if an intruder went through that window, but also we cannot just disregard it and say that he did not come through that window.
Smith knew that the local police had said they'd found no evidence of an intruder. Although his evidence so far was inconclusive, he felt it should at least be kept in mind. The Boulder police rejected his advice. Lead detective Steve Thomas later publicly described the idea of an intruder as far-fetched and ridiculous. Ignoring Smith's advice, police set out to intensify media pressure on the Ramseys. Lacking evidence to justify their arrest, they hoped this might break the couple, forcing a confession. The fact that Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen, had entered JonBenét in children's pageants fueled the accusations of sexual abuse. Now it was leaked that police had warrants to search the Ramsey home for pornography. It led to a media frenzy.
I did not kill my daughter, JonBenét. There have also been innuendos that she has been or was sexually molested. I can tell you those were the most hurtful innuendos.
No link with pornography or sex abuse was ever found. But when the Ramseys talked to journalists in an attempt to plead their innocence, no one believed them. Yet by the time of that press conference, Smith had found more compelling evidence of an intruder. Early in Detective Lou Smith's investigation, he had found evidence of a break-in through a window at the Ramsey home. Now, more evidence started to emerge.
The open window itself really wouldn't mean too much. But if an intruder came in here, he would have left other clues behind him. This is the way he would have come. And it's just a short distance to the staircase that leads upstairs. And up these stairs, we found one of the most important clues in this case. In this small alcove just off the kitchen was the pen that was used to write the ransom note. Just a short distance away, on a small table, was the pad that the ransom note was written on. Could the killer have written a ransom note here? Sure. Do we know for sure? No. But the ransom note, we do know, is one of the best clues left behind by this killer. First of all, it was done in a very calm, controlled way. The person was not writing this note in panic. I've interviewed many murderers and even psychopaths. After a murder, they are extremely agitated. It is very difficult for them even to sit down. In my estimation, there's just absolutely no way that they could have written that note after that murder. I believe that this note was written before the murder. This note suggests violence, what he's going to do to this little girl. If you want her to see 1997, will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will be denied her remains for proper burial. Will result in your daughter being beheaded. She dies. She dies. She dies. She dies. 99% chance of killing your daughter. Don't think that killing will be difficult. This is what the killer is saying. It's vicious and brutal. It's a personality. It would be a great vantage point for anyone that would want to see if the Ramseys were coming home that night. What's interesting about this room, we did see that some of the drawers in the bathroom, right off the bedroom, were partially open. Looked like they were out of place. Also in this room, there was found the Ramseys were coming home that night. What's interesting about this room, we did see that some of the drawers in the bathroom, right off the bedroom, were partially open. Looked like they were out of place. Also in this room, there was found a rope. And we don't know where that rope came from. No one can explain why that rope is in this room. Also, what was real interesting in this room, and it's just a small detail, is that there was a dust ruffle that was tucked in, except for just a small area. It seemed to have been pulled out. Now, does that mean that the killer may have been under that bed? We just don't know. But it's just an observation. One of the small things that detectives look for, he could have been under there. And it would be a perfect vantage point for him to go right into John Benet's bedroom in order to take her out later.
Okay.
While Smith was finding troubling evidence pointing towards an intruder, the police were developing a new theory. They believed that John Benet had been killed by her mother, Patsy, who had lashed out in anger after her daughter had wet her bed. The police were angered at Smith's suspicion that they were wrong, and angered, too, that prosecutors in the DA's office were beginning to listen. Angered at Smith's suspicion that they were wrong, and angered, too, that prosecutors in the DA's office were beginning to listen to him. Lead Detective Steve Thomas accused Smith and the DA staff of losing touch with reality and of impeding the investigation. Concerned at the hostility, Smith turned to his old boss, John Anderson, the sheriff of...
That the lead should be dismissed, that it was of no value. And that was very concerning. I thought there was a lot of physical evidence that pointed to someone other than a family member.
Despite Despite this, police still hoped to force a confession, and media pressure on the Ramseys intensified.
Vanity Fair says Boulder police are so sure of their case, they've had arrest affidavits prepared since May.
They list evidence against the two parties
John and Patsy Ramsey.
in quite specific detail.
And this information supports a charge of what?
Murder.
But by then, Smith had uncovered dramatic new evidence, which would change everything.
That the sheets on her bed were clean. There was no sign of urine on those sheets. There was no evidence that JonBenét wet her bed that night. There was no signs of a struggle in this room.
The bed was not disturbed, nor was the bedside table. The absence of a struggle pointed towards the parents.
Someone that JonBenét knew, like her parents, could have taken her from the bed without a struggle taking place.
Smith discovered how she was taken while pursuing another problem, the cause of mysterious marks on her back and face, which the autopsy report described as unexplained abrasions.
We were pretty sure that these injuries weren't on JonBenét beforehand because pictures were taken of her earlier that day. So these injuries occurred right at or about the time of death. So we had to find out what these marks were.
The explanation came when he and a lawyer in the DA's office, by chance, put these two photographs together.
Suddenly, it became apparent that the marks themselves, both on the is this one, and it's the air taser stun gun. If a stun gun is used on a little girl, I'm sure it would have knocked her flat. And it would have allowed the killer to take her from her bed without her struggling.
The Boulder police rejected Smith's evidence about a stun
On
gun.
the outside of the clothing of JonBenét, is it possible that our killer tried to put JonBenét in that suitcase? Is it possible that he tried to take her out this window in a suitcase? Could it have been a kidnapping followed by a murder? Very easily it could have been. Perhaps he had intended to take JonBenét out that window, and he just couldn't get her out, and he decided to kill her.
When Smith presented his evidence to the Boulder police, they rejected it. Lead Detective Steve Thomas said the intruder was non-existent and the idea of a stun gun preposterous. While Smith's findings were kept confidential, the police leaked their theory to the media. According to Smith, what actually happened was very different. JonBenét was strangled to death with a garrote.